Hi, welcome back to Off Picture Discussions. My name's John Capone. Today I'm joined by Blake Simon. Blake is a writer, director, producer. We went to film school together at Loyola Marymount University. Blake has worked with James Mangold over the past few years. He is a producer with him. He also writes and directs his own original material. He has two short films that have come out within the past couple of years. The most recent one being Faces. It's found a lot of success on the festival circuit. It won the audience award at the Fantasia International Film Festival up in Montreal. Blake's a very passionate filmmaker. He's also a really good person. I really enjoyed this conversation with him, and I hope you do too. Thank you for watching. All right, I am here with Blake Simon. Blake, it's good to see you. Writer, director, producer. I know those are the big three. Is anything else you consider yourself these days?
I don't know. Occasional editor. I can't seem to leave that one behind.
Right. Well, listen, thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I've been following you on social media. We were just talking offline about the last time we saw each other before COVID, but things
Yeah.
have gotten incredibly busy. And just following your path through social media, it seems like you're in kind of a unique space right now, a little bit within the industry and a little bit, doing your own thing independently. So that's something I want to talk about as we get into
Absolutely.
this. But my first question is, when you started out with, obviously growing up and, watching movies, right? When you started watching movies and then making your own films, what was that initial impulse,
Hmm.
and maybe you talk about a certain film or a certain director, but, that experience of watching a story unfold visually on the big
hmm
screen, what called you to, want to engage with it?
Absolutely. Yeah. No. I mean, I know exactly what it was, and it may not be the most exciting answer, unfortunately, because many felt this way. But for me as a kid, that initial spark, like it did come from Star Wars. It came from a New Hope, the first one, obviously, Episode 4. But I always loved movies as a kid. Before that, I like pretty much would spend all my free time just watching VHSs at home. Whatever they were,
Yeah.
everything, whatever my parents had, every genre,
Right.
every whatever they thought was suitable. But it wasn't until I really saw Star Wars that I and Indiana Jones around the same time, but those were the films that truly blew me away and changed what I thought a movie could be. But Star Wars specifically was what made me think I want to make movies. And that's because when I watched Star Wars, I was so obsessed with this world and the people in it. And I just I think after I watched A New Hope for the first time, I rewatched it every night for 1 to 2 months or something. Um, and I was just I just wanted to be on Tatooine, or
Yeah.
I wanted to be in the Falcon. And I just was so obsessed with that world that when I realized who George Lucas was, when I realized, wait a second, because a lot of people at a young age, they watch movies and they go, oh, I want to be that guy on screen, I'm going to be an actor or whatever. For me, I
Right.
never had that impulse. I just was like, I want to live in this space. But then when I learned who George Lucas was, I was like, wait a second, a person made this
Yeah.
thing that I'm so obsessed with. Someone, he just made it up and then put it on my TV. I want to do that for people. I want to build a world that people can want to be in. Which I guess,
Yeah.
given the movies I'm making now, I don't know if you'd want to be in them. But that's where it kind of started.
Yeah.
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 So
Very cool.
yeah.
Yeah, I would say it was similar, honestly, for me, like that whole, I mean, I remember the same sort of, frame of mind of like you watch those films, whether it's the
Yeah.
first Star Wars or Raiders of the Lost Ark, and as a kid, you watch the screen, and then when the movie finishes, you look outside, and all of a sudden, your mind is buzzing with imagination. You're like, I
Yes.
want to, same feeling. I want to live in this world. I want to interact with this storyline and feel the emotions, the adrenaline of this action plot, and play with the whip of Indiana Jones or the hat and all
Right?
that, and like you said, interact with the Millennium Falcon, and I think in my experience too, it even extends, when I guess I was 14 at the time when The Dark Knight came out, and it was the same feeling, watching that film on screen opening night and Heath Ledger's performance literally like sizzling off the screen. You're just dialed in. You're like, what the hell is this guy going to do with this
Yeah.
character? And
Yeah.
it really is that possibility, right? That unpredictability that comes with great storytelling. There's something deeper in it that speaks to us, the Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, but there's something happening in the originality of that storytelling, whether it's Lucas or Nolan or Spielberg,
Sure.
that
Sure.
just completely takes you away, and
And
that
it
edge
is
of your
that
seat feeling,
indescribable
right?
thing. Because, like you
Yeah,
said, like, it's like, sure, Joseph Campbell, like, we all know where it's coming from, Hidden
right.
Fortress, but it's like
We could study
the,
it theoretically, right? Yeah,
it's something intangible beyond that sets it
yeah,
apart. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like, you could do
for
everything
sure.
described in those set of instructions Campbell
Right,
wrote, and you're not going to
right.
get Star Wars without Lucas. And so it's like it is something magical, you know?
Yeah, 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 for sure.
Well,
Okay, so that's
just
yep.
I know, just not to make it all about you for a second, but you're a filmmaker and an actor. So where did that's like
Mm,
which came first? And because obviously you've done
yeah,
a really interesting, compelling job balancing the two, like even since post school. But like for me, there was like a
sure.
clear like I can't do the other thing, right? But like you've done both
Right,
so
right.
well, which is really really fun. Like, did one
Yeah.
come first?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like if I'm thinking back to the earliest sort of, musings and experimenting with story, coming out of those early films, like this is right,
Yeah,
like 5, 6 years old. My parents tell me, and they tell these stories recently now having Luca, my son, because it
yeah,
brings back all these memories for them. But, I would stop watching. I would like watch Star Wars when I got up, like having breakfast or after breakfast, right? And this is like sort of the idyllic childhood, maybe summer day, or
sure.
when you're 3 years old before you go to preschool, and watch that film, and then I would immediately start like cycling through these costume of characters. I would have like the Phantom of the Opera costume. I would
Mm,
have the Jack Dawson costume from Titanic. I would have an Indiana Jones costume. I would have a football player costume. And my parents were like, you would put one on, play with it for like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and then you're like, all right, costume change, and go up and then switch. And it was, I mean, maybe that's the beginning of sort of the acting part of it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
maybe initially I was drawn more to the characters and the actors in the films
sure,
than your
yeah,
experience of, the initial impulse of like, well, I want to see who stands this whole thing up on its
right,
feet.
yeah,
But I would want to get into like the skin. And I think it was that, it's storytelling, right? You're improving. What would
yes,
happen if I walked into the woods with this affect, with this, attitude as this
hmm
character, right? And you immediately start to just play around, and I think that part of the that department, or that aspect of storytelling, was always in my DNA. I think going to film school, I evolved into wanting to, I think, write and direct and play more with the form in general,
yeah, yeah,
into
that
film
makes
school. But
sense.
that part of it, the acting part, always stayed with me. And I, in fact, got into an acting program after LMU, after graduating, and really more as like from that frame of mind, being as a director of like how can I bridge this gap? Like I know what I
Yeah,
like as an actor and what I like to explore, but I
yeah,
want to take a formal class and see how the acting instructor interacts with us as
yeah.
a group of actors, and see if I could
Where is the
figure out.
overlap there?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
how did?
Where's the overlap?
Yeah,
And interestingly enough, and I'll get back to you, but this is the last thing I'll say about that acting program is, um, it was Meisner technique. So really,
hmm
Meisner's known for the repetition of, I like your shirt, you like my shirt, I like your shirt. It's just the back and forth.
yeah,
People who don't understand are like, it's just so crazy. It's just such an actor thing to do, right? Um, but really, what it's about is getting underneath the lines. So
yeah,
when you bounce back and forth, you're not listening just for the line or your line. You're you're all of a sudden seeing the dimensionality of like how the person across from you is emotionalized, where they're
right,
coming from in terms of their objective and their
right.
intention. And it was just, opened up a new dimension for me as a writer. Really, I the
Really?
first year of that acting program was more about dramaturgy, dramatic writing than it was even about acting for me, right? That was
Wow.
my perception of it. So writing, the directing, and acting, and yeah, I mean it is interesting. It's a good question. I with Neon Bleed, I didn't act in it. I had a small
Sure,
Hitchcockian
yeah.
cameo in it, but it was. I mean, a production like that, you're like, okay, I gotta just like dial in on the
You're like, I
making
got
sure I
one
direct a
thing at a
film.
time. Yeah, yeah.
Right,
I
right.
don't know how
So
people do both. I mean, that's
yeah, yeah,
I
it's
mean, you're
wild at
probably on
that
track to
level,
do that
right?
at some point, but at that level, it's like, yeah, I personally can't even imagine it. But that's a whole other rabbit hole we could
Yeah,
go down.
right, right. Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, coming out of, let's say, those early years, right? Maybe
Yeah.
it's you're 6 years old, you're 8 years old, crossing into adolescence, and
Hmm.
when is the moment you consider going to film school? I don't know if it's as early as middle school for you, high school. You always knew you were on this path. What was
Yeah.
that next step for you? I want to take this more seriously.
So it would have been ninth grade
Okay.
because so first year of high school, and that was the year that a friend of mine decided to start like a filmmakers club in high school, and we became friends through the club actually. But we went to a school that was super college prep academic focused, so there
Mm-hmm.
was almost next to no support for the arts. Like there was like a jazz band class, but other than that, like whether if you wanted to act or like make movies or even just like creative write, there was almost nothing. Paint,
Okay.
nothing. So this guy made this filmmaking club, not knowing who would join, and I was like the first person to join, and so he was president, I was vice president. When he graduated, I took the club over after him. But it was an amazing thing because it was like that club was our film school because we just like filmmaking, making a movie nowadays, like it's a long process, right, to get it
Right.
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 But back in those days, we had no formal education. We didn't know like script format or anything, the 180-degree rule, whatever. It was like we were fully off the rails. We were shooting on mini DV tape, and we would just make like probably three or so shorts a year
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
screen them for an audience. And these events we took very seriously at like 14, 15 years old. But like I wore all the hats, right? Like on my films. So I'd go, okay, we're screening on December 30th, or I guess you not then. But like, you're
Yeah.
screening on
Yeah.
X date. I'm gonna go
Right.
write a
Right. Right.
script, like
Yep.
either this weekend or over the course of this week. I'm gonna call up everyone I know, and I'm gonna do the light. I'm gonna set up all the lights, the boom, the camera on a tripod. I'm gonna hire my best friends all as actors, and then I don't know how to edit, so I'm gonna teach myself editing when I'm along with teaching myself how the camera works and where does the lighting work best, and whatever, and how do I turn the boom mic on. And then I'm just going to tell my friends, stand there, say this line, do it again, run over here, and then I'm going to go figure out how to edit. And we just would do that on repeat, like maybe three times a year. And these events actually got bigger. At a certain point, we were screening these shitty movies that nowadays I'd never want anyone to look at for like 250 people. Like we were renting out Lemley theaters. We were like so proud.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and in hindsight, it's like, wow, I can't believe I showed people those. But it truly was this DIY film school because,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I remember getting to LMU, and which I have only good things to say about. But freshman year, I remember like half the people you meet like have never touched a camera before
Right. Right.
before their grade depends on it. And
Right.
it wasn't that I was better because I had, but I had a
Just more
confidence.
comfortable. Yeah. Comfortable and
Exactly. I
confident.
just
Yep.
was like, oh, yeah. Oh, the lights. Oh, you just turn it on over here. Or like, oh, for sure. Like, like it
Yeah.
was so much less scary because of
Right.
that experience. So when people
Yep.
ask me, like, even nowadays, they're like, oh, is this your first short? Or how many shorts have you made? Like, I think a
Yeah.
lot of people tend to like want to only include films even post film school. But I go back to ninth grade because I'm like, and I don't include
Yeah.
class projects, but anything that I sat down and was like, like a music video or make a movie for history class. None of that. But which I did. But I count anytime I sat down and was like, I'm going to write a script and make a movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when I started making films.
Yeah.
So 16 years ago.
Yeah, and I think Kubrick has a line. It's like the best film school is just going out and making your film, right? I mean, it's a part. I think it's just the nature of what the animal is, the machinery of film, or the organism that it is. It's so much just trial and error, and it
Yeah.
is a longer process, even for a short film. If you're putting like a 2 week turnaround, there's a lot you have to do in those 2 weeks. A lot of different things you have to do in those 2 weeks. So
Yeah.
just learning and getting the muscle memory of the process, what it feels like to even just write a first draft of a script, right? I mean, because there's a whole thing about just writing a first draft, just getting it down, and I think
Yeah.
that's where maybe amateur or people that are starting out writing scripts or never even get through it. They're just you're being too precious in that first draft, and the more scripts you write, the more you learn. Okay, I know what this first draft is going to feel like. This moment's not going to feel great, but I got to get through it, and it's just down the line, the different parts of the process. The script breakdown, pre-production, production, post. I mean, there's a feeling to all of those different moments or phases of the process, right?
Yeah, and it's exactly what you said. You can't be too precious. It's like
Right.
perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if you wanted perfect all the time, you'd get nothing done ever. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and the other thing, like, there's a million quotes about this. Like, films aren't finished; they're abandoned. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
why we have
Yeah.
deadlines, release schedules.
Right.
Like, you just
Right.
have to let go.
Yep. Yep.
Unless you're George
Exactly.
Lucas, but like,
Yeah. Or some sort of European director just come
yeah,
back again and again to it. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I mean, well said. I think that's so having that sort of comfortability, confidence put you in a position in film school to maybe take more advantage of, I don't need to feel like stressed out about even learning these simple technical things. I think too, with, even 4 years happens so quick in a degree like film production, because there's so much to learn, and you could
yeah,
get sort of siloed or down a tributary of just wanting to learn like color science or
yeah,
cinematography, or go off into the acting route or writing route. And
right,
I think if you're someone who wants to be a director, jack of all trades, you need to have some sort of comfortability with the form to start to, figure out, okay, how am I going to bring my team together? How am I going to,
hmm,
I think, execute what I see in my head, instead of
yeah,
during the production process just getting bogged down in the minutia of, getting the day done, or, whatever it is,
yes,
right? The technical
yeah.
part of it.
Exactly. And it's film school is fascinating because it's like, this amazing space where you get to learn all these like different, you know, careers and job responsibilities and heads of departments, all the different roles, but which is like, not that different than what I was doing DIY, except that you're doing it in a more formal place with all the actual proper equipment and rules.
Right.
But you're also meeting all the people that
Yeah.
like give
Yeah.
more of a shit about their world than you,
Right.
right? Like
Right.
my domain has always been directing, which means I have a lot of interest in all the other areas. Like I'm interested in camera and lighting, and I'm interested in sound and music. But I want to, like, in film school, it's like you want to start working with people who care more about that thing than you do, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, which is
Yep.
fascinating because like growing up DIY, like you don't have that. You're just like, I'm gonna do my best over here on the
Right.
camera, and then the moment you meet like these great
Yeah.
DPs, you're just like, holy shit! I knew how to turn the camera on and put a light somewhere, but like you're talking another language. Like, come do my movie,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
film school is really interesting. Like
Yeah.
it's for me, it's more like I feel like it was less about learning how to make a movie and more about learning what to make a movie about, as
Mm-hmm.
well as who you want to work with, or even the types of people you want to work with.
Yeah, I mean you said it right there, like the types of people, right? And
Yeah,
and this is a whole sort of bigger conversation about, organizational culture and the soft skills of how to talk to certain people given their
yeah,
personalities and their skill
yeah,
sets and things like that, which I think is, a big part of directing too, right? I mean, there's the
yeah,
artistry, there's the vision part of it, there's, the taking a script and seeing it visually and the whole edit in your head part of it. And then there's like just being a manager, right? A manager of an
Mm-hmm.
army, and what
Yes.
those key department heads, the type of shorthand and language you need to use with
Yes.
certain department heads. And I think you're right. I think film school, because it is like sort of a microcosm of a studio, right? With the different
Yes.
personalities needing to go to the head of production at film school and get your permit signed off on, or get your papers submitted, like that whole part of it, right?
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
you learn a lot about how to communicate, how to work within a system, how to work on a set, obviously,
Yeah.
and just go through the entirety of the process, so that when you come out you feel like, okay, I've met some people, I know how to interface and
Mm-hmm.
interact with people within my field, and now it's just getting out and figuring out, okay, what do I want to do with this thing I've learned,
Exactly.
you know
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, no, it's great. If you could sum up like one, maybe one takeaway, or even if it's like one film, something you learned doing a film of yours in film school, that was impactful, or some sort of
Mm.
insight, something you took out, after graduating from Loyola Marymount University, what would that be?
Ooh, that's a
Or
great
maybe it was like
question.
a moment, some sort
Yeah. Yeah.
of
Yeah.
moment or experience you had within a process of making a film, or just in
I
college.
I think the big thing I learned is kind of like, hmm, I'm just thinking about like the two movies I made, and like, one in my mind was not great and the other was more of a success, but both were like big productions,
Mhm.
and pretty much both times I was told not to do it. Like it was biting off more than, a student
Yeah.
should chew. And it's interesting because you could argue that they were proven right after my 300 Labyrinth. Because in that movie, I was like the maze guy. I was like the guy who built the maze, and
Mm-hmm.
I'd never built a set before or just done like that scale of a movie. And I remember pretty much most of my filmmaking career, I've always kind of written something. I straight up didn't know how we were going to figure it out,
Mm.
or I've never done, because I knew it's sink or swim. You're gonna have to, like,
Right.
you're either gonna fail or you're gonna figure it out. And I was always betting on the, like, I want to figure it out and not be afraid of this thing. And
Mm.
so that, in high school with that film club, I was doing all genres. Like, I was doing sci-fi, film noir. I even made a romantic comedy, and that all like culminated in like I made a western. Um, and I was like, I really felt like I could do anything,
Mm.
which is a great headspace and a very dangerous one. And so for 300, I wrote Labyrinth, and I was like, it's ancient Greece. We're building a maze, all this shit. Like, every shot of the movie's a visual effects shot because he's got a torch through, like, all the steady cam he's walking through. And I'm like, I've never
Wow.
done visual effects. So I really was just like, everything that could screw me, put it in there. And,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and you're kind of told, like, you sure you don't want to shoot something in your dorm room, like like two people breaking up or something, and
Yeah.
uh, and it was just interesting because it was like Labyrinth was so fascinating because I became the maze guy, and I was like, oh hell yeah, that's a sick reputation. And then the movie's not really great, and so you're like, what's it like? Was it worth it? Doesn't matter. But then I
Mm.
with 400, it was like, I just want to try again. And obviously we did Goldilocks and did the same thing. We're going to build a giant spaceship, and then that movie worked. But
Mm-hmm.
and then I became the spaceship guy. Nobody remembered me as the maze guy. But what's hilarious is, um, I could, I mean, as far as lessons and takeaways, I couldn't have made Goldilocks without trying to do Labyrinth first.
Right,
So
right.
I think the lesson was like, sink or swim. You're gonna own the
Mm-hmm.
success or failure, and
Yeah.
you have to be okay with that. And if
Yep.
you're okay with that, then do whatever the hell you want. Because not every movie I've made has been a success, and I've had to own that, and
Yeah.
that's okay, right? But if you're afraid of failure, like,
Yeah.
I don't know that you're ever going to make something great. I don't know.
Right.
That's my
No,
takeaway.
I think that's super perceptive, and to learn that in film school is huge because, I mean, that is just the nature of the business we're in. Like it is an art form. It's
Yeah.
commercial, absolutely, but within the commercial um, envelope of it all, it's still an art form. Even if you're
Yeah.
making building a script and then a film off of algorithms and a bunch of marketplace data, it's still an art form.
Yeah.
And there's things that could go wrong. There's things that fall below the level of how you hope to execute them, right? And I think
Always.
that's it's awesome you learn that so early. I mean, I can say, like, even coming out of college, I still kept learning that lesson, and probably learned it even better the higher the stakes were, right? Is that
Of course. Yeah.
if you can find something in your film that you were happy and sort of satisfied with taking on that challenge, and maybe you didn't execute it, but you felt like, I did it to the best of my ability in that
Yeah.
moment. I was pursuing this vision, and I tried to execute it the best way I knew how in this moment.
Yeah.
I think that's a win, regardless of what the success or failure is, how it's received, on the festival
Yeah.
circuit, sales agents, whatever, marketing. If you set out to do something that you had in your head and you executed it to the best of your ability and you had people come together to do it, I think there's certainly things you can take away from it, and
Of
that's the
course. Yeah.
success in and of
No, but
itself.
you've already done something more than half the people were too afraid to do or haven't done for whatever excuse. But then on top of
Right.
that, you're going to be better for it the next time,
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you've grown as an artist and it's one more thing you know how you would approach differently. And that's invaluable. Like that's the only way to grow.
Right. I think at the end of the day, we're human beings, we're evolutionary organisms, right? Coming down to project basis, we go out into the unknown, and this is the Campbellian thing, right? We go out into the unknown, we assimilate information and events, we react to them, and then on the other side of them, we look back and we assimilate, that experience, that
Yeah.
information, and hopefully learn from it, or evolve as artists, right?
Yeah.
You did the Western thing, you did the Greek labyrinth thing, and not to say you don't go back to that, but maybe in a future film you're bringing together those elements in a new and interesting way that is an evolution, of
Yeah.
that work potentially.
Totally.
So
Totally. Absolutely.
coming out of LMU,
Yeah.
now I guess just, yeah, tell me what it was like, because as we all as film students have this experience of walking across the stage on, I think for us it was May 16th, 2016, and okay, like, all right, what's next? Got to get a job in the industry
Yeah.
and hopefully fight for some sort of creative path here, right?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I mean, in terms of getting into the industry, I got really lucky um, because I sort of was kind of working full time straight out of graduation. Basically, that's, I guess, the other thing I didn't talk about. But at a young age, I was just, in addition to making movies, I was trying to like work as many places as possible just to make connections.
Hmm.
So like I, in like ninth grade, I was just like PAing for like indie filmmakers, just to learn what a set was like. In 10th grade, I started working at a post production house, also as a PA, just seeing what editing and how it all came together on like a more professional scale.
Yeah.
Um, and then like junior, senior year, I started working at Red, the camera company.
Oh, that's right. I
Um,
remember. Yeah, I remember that when
Yeah,
you were.
and
Yeah.
they do this thing where they do lessons. I don't know if they still do it, but it was called Reducation, and it was like basically just teaching people how to use their cameras. But mind you, this is like back in the day when those cameras were way more new and digital was like on the precipice. So
Yeah.
not
Right.
everyone knew how to use a digital camera or what the post workflow was.
Right.
So
Right.
I started working there. I think because like I got in high school, I got really close with Adobe. Um, I started on Final Cut 7, and then I was really early on Premiere,
Hmm.
and I knew a bunch of Adobe people, and they were partners with Red, and so my name came up, and I started helping out at Red, like, and I hardly knew anything about the camera. like shooting it, but I knew how to edit it. And at the time, they were really trying to do like online only workflows where they were like, we don't have to transcode because Premiere can edit R3D files natively. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
which it still can. In hindsight,
Right.
I think people have learned like it's just so taxing that, we don't always want to do that. But at the time, they were really pushing
Right.
that workflow as like, look what you can do. And
Right.
so I sort of just I don't know. I kind of just started working there almost voluntarily and then kind of just fell upward in terms of like, oh, you know how to edit all this stuff? Like, go teach people. And so, um, where am I getting with this? The point is, aside from the high school thing, I started working at a bunch of different places, right? Like Post
Yeah.
House,
Yeah.
camera company, indie film sets. So it's just like a really great holistic view. But while I was at LMU, one of my bosses from Red left to go work at 20th Century Fox. And
Okay.
I was not in a position to like be working on major motion pictures or anything. I'm literally still in film school at the time. But
Right.
there were people there, specifically in the post department, that like, have their own creative endeavors who needed help with like side projects. And so
Sure.
I became the guy editing and learning virtual reality equipment and stuff and doing all this stuff on the side. And it became busier and busier to the point that when senior year of LMU rolled around, I arranged my schedule so all my classes were Monday and Tuesday, and Wednesday, Thursday, Friday I was going to the studio a lot to like work with people,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which was incredibly demanding and difficult. Um, but uh, but it was great because then when graduation rolled around, it easily flipped into a full time thing.
Yeah.
And so I was very fortunate because those early days of trying to work places kind of just paid off. And when I graduated, they're like, I was already working 3 days a week. Then they're like, oh, great, you can come in 2 more days. Great, perfect. And I just started doing that right away. And that
Yeah.
obviously wasn't the dream job out of film school. Like I'm just like helping people with these odd things and random stuff. Um, but I'd been doing it long enough that those that kind of work helped me get into the Editors Guild. Um,
Mm.
and getting into the Editors Guild meant I was eligible to get hired on a major motion picture. And so uh, it was like April of 2016 that I got hired as an assistant slash apprentice editor on Logan. Um, so
Okay. Yeah.
I literally got hired on that movie and then like went back to do the walk ceremony at LMU
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
went back into the cutting room as if like nothing ever happened. Um,
Right.
and that's kind
Interesting
of
final
what
month of
happened.
overlap, right? Of like
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
out of film school in this one frame of mind, and you, like you said, you had been building up these jobs that just snowballed or cascaded into that position where, all right, I'm in the Editors Guild, I'm eligible to work on a film, and now there's an opening, there's an open door here for the
Yeah.
post assistant editing job on Logan.
Yeah.
That's very cool. And then, yeah, you get that sort of like last month of, what is it? Like senior, what do they call it? Like senioritis, that last
Senioritis.
month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like,
it
all
was
right,
so real.
wrap it
Even
up.
making, even on my 400, like I basically neglected every other class and it was, it was kind of an open secret. Like
Yeah.
nobody like had any illusion that I was focused on anything else. I remember like senior year last semester, I had like film studies classes Monday morning at like 8 a.m. and it was like dedicated sleep time. Like I was like, I'm making a movie. I don't have to. I was like, I'm up all night editing. Like I gotta like it wasn't the best, but it's we all do it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it befalls all of us at some point.
Yeah, yeah,
Definitely. Well, that's cool. So now you're off and running with Logan. I mean, maybe quickly just talk about what that experience was like. I think it was after Logan, you started working more closely with James Mangold, and then obviously the projects you guys have done together since. But
uh-huh.
maybe just quickly, yeah, just what was the takeaway with Logan in terms of coming in as an assistant editor and then coming out of that project?
Yeah. Logan was fascinating because I was like so proud to be working on a big movie. And it was kind of, like fresh out of film school, like dream come true, like regardless
Right.
of your role on it.
Sure.
And I learned a lot, both not just in terms of editing, but in terms of just like I got to watch, Jim, the director, work, um, watching him was fascinating, and I learned so much. Um, but the other thing I learned wasn't something I didn't know, but it was just that like I don't want to be editing. Like I actually am fine editing my own stuff,
Right. Right.
which I now co-edit. Like I don't do it by myself anymore, but I still enjoy that part of the process. But being a member of such a large team where you're not actually cutting scenes, you're just like, media
Prepping.
management,
Yeah.
exporting, turning over for different departments. Like it
Right.
just was so not what I aspired or like really had pleasure doing.
Sure.
So when Logan finished, I went and talked to Jim and I just said, thank you so much for this experience. Like I've learned so much watching you. I'd love to ask you for a piece of advice, which is like, uh, this editing I've always enjoyed, but it was frankly kind of just my foot in the door to the industry, and it's not what I want to do. I want to direct. I want to do what you do. Like,
Yeah.
what do you advise? And without any hesitation, he just said, stop editing. He was like, go direct. He's like, it doesn't matter. He's like, and if someone's going to pay you like $1 million, $2 million to direct their script, like, don't do it. I was like, really? He's
Mm,
like, yeah.
mm,
He's like, anyone hiring, kid out of film school to direct their movie, like, it's because their script's complete shit and they don't know anyone. And even if they think they can get the money, like, it's not what you want to be doing. Go write your own script and go make that and do it for a fraction of the budget. It'll still be better than their
right.
movie. But, like,
Yeah.
stop editing because, it's just going to take time and prevent you from getting where you want to go. So I
Hmm.
was like,
Hmm.
well, his answer was so black and white that I guess I better go do that. So then I was like, Logan finishes, I go home and I'm like, all right, I'm going to stop editing. I'm going to write a script, a feature. I'm going to go make it. And while I'm during that period of unemployment, um, 20th Century Fox calls me with another assistant editing gig. And on this one, I'd be promoted, I'd make more money, and it'd be a movie that's going into post like very soon.
Mm.
And I said no. And it was terrifying because I'm like a kid less than a
Yeah.
year
Very
out of film school.
counterintuitive, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like less than a
Yeah.
year out of film school. My bank account's only going one direction. Hollywood is calling. And I'm
Hmm.
like, thanks, but no thanks. I was like, who the hell am I?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
really scary. It was really scary. I mean, and it wasn't thanks, no thanks. It was very like, I love you guys so much. I hate saying no to you. Please call me in the future.
Right.
Next time I might say yes
Of
when I'm
course.
more
Yeah.
strapped for cash. But
Yeah.
no, they were cool about it. And so then I spent about 6 months turning jobs down, unemployed, writing a feature
Mm.
that I thought was going to be my first feature. Um, and then at the end of 6 months, I kind of finished the script, and I'm like, I now as push comes to shove, I better start making plans, making phone calls, get a team going. And around that time, I got a call from Jim, from his previous assistant, basically saying, "Do you want to come work for him full time because he needs a new assistant?"
Mm.
And it was such an interesting moment because it was like right as I finished the script. And so I was at this
Hmm.
interesting crossroad of like, I've got this script, I can go make this movie now, or I
Right.
put it on hold for an indefinite amount of time and go do this. But it was so, I mean, I literally kept thinking about The Godfather. I was like, this is so clearly an offer you don't refuse. Like there was
Yeah.
no, there kind of was, like, I remember saying, like, can you give me a day to think about it? And then I hang
Yeah.
up and I'm like, I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? It's just like,
Right. Right. Those
so
that gut feeling, and I think it can
yeah.
come in it could come in a project. It can come in an opportunity to work with someone like this, but
Yeah.
those little, yeah, those like that little, I don't want to call it tightness because it's not a bad thing you get in your
Hmm.
chest, but just some activity there, right? You're
I mean,
like,
it is
okay,
tightness. It is. You're
yeah,
just
it's
like,
like, yeah, sure,
it's a huge decision, you know?
right, right, but it's something that you feel a definite, okay, like
Yeah.
maybe, the timing, the cosmic timing is like, I just finished this script and
Yeah.
I need to just take a breather and evaluate things at this
Yes.
point anyway, right?
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
something opens, and that came at a fortuitous time. And
It
yeah,
did.
so maybe so now, and was that essentially right before Ford versus Ferrari? You guys were, he was going into that at that point.
Yeah. So I I started working for him as his assistant in January of 2018.
Okay.
And we were just starting prep on Ford v Ferrari. And so I did that film with him, and I mean, learned so much, and got to work with Damon and Christian Bale, which was insane. And then,
Yeah.
and then it was awesome. Like, the movie got nominated for Best Picture, won an Oscar for sound and editing, and it was
Right.
just like,
That kind of
holy, yeah,
became like a whole ride, right? Like
yes,
showing you like this is like high, absolutely, not to say Logan wasn't high caliber, it's a very unique superhero movie, but like this is high caliber, like taking it
yeah,
all the way to the
yeah.
Oscars,
So that
you
was a
know.
crazy second movie to work on.
Yeah. Yeah.
But unlike Logan, where I was in the cutting room, I was on set every day.
Mm,
Um,
hmm
and that was grueling and like
mm. Yeah,
and
what a production.
unbelievable.
Race
Yeah,
cars.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I remember the very first day of set. We were shooting out in Lancaster, and
Yeah.
day one, it was 113 degrees. We were shooting the Willow Springs race, and I just remember walking into set outside and being like, "Oh my God." Like, I was like, "Here we go." Um,
That's a tough day
so
one. That's a
it's a
tough
tough day
temperature for
one, man.
day
It
one of
really
this big
was.
production. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, it was an amazing experience. And then after that I was just working with Jim full time. Did not leave a ton of time to do my own projects. I didn't. I've done a number of movies with him now, and after a number of years, I was elevated to become like an in-house producer for him. He has a new
Yeah.
assistant for a number of years now, um, and yeah, I'm only now sort of at the point where I've done a better job like balancing my own work. Because
Yeah.
it's just takes so much time and energy. Even you go home and you're kind of like, I have nothing left to give at the end of the
Yeah.
day. Um,
Right. Right.
and then it was
I
after
mean, so
Indiana
that was a
Jones.
question I wanted to ask you, right? Because
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
thought I
Please.
thought this conversation would be really interesting and unique because you kind of you've had one foot in to the sort
Yeah.
of traditional, taking like a career path from college, now working with one of the top directors of his generation, right? Taking that as far as it can go, and all of the sort of day to day grueling demands of working with someone that intimately, right? Like I can only imagine. I think we met up for a drink one time after you had taken that more full time assistant position,
Yeah.
and you were, gracious to be present with me, but obviously there was a part of you that was tethered to that phone, right? Of
Yeah.
like,
Any
and
buzz, yeah,
any
you're just
buzz,
like,
yeah, any
you're ready
request,
to go.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And so, kind of, and obviously there's a huge education that comes with that, not only for watching a director work on set and through post and in
Hmm.
pre-production and screenwriting phase, but also just those things we talked about, the other side of the director job, which is the manager position of watching how someone on that level conducts himself, uh, working with writers, working on set with the different department heads, with actors, in post, making decisions about sound design and score. And I assume working with the studio, working with 20th Century Fox for the marketing plan,
Hmm.
going
Yep.
to press junkets, the whole thing, right? Talking to the
100%.
media.
Yep.
I mean, that's an invaluable thing. But maybe talk to me about like what was that like, putting all of this energy and all of this attention, absorbing all this information and giving yourself your effort to someone's process like that, but also, having that little voice in your head, maybe when you wake up or when you get back after a 14-hour day, 18-hour day, maybe in some cases,
Hmm.
that's like, where am I with my work? Where am I with
Yeah.
the stories I want to tell?
Yeah. I think there's like a point early in the process when you know you've made that decision to like kind of live in that world, um, where you have to remind yourself, like at least I had to remind myself, like this is not forever. Like I'm gonna keep making my own stuff, but you need to be okay, kind of putting it on hold at least in the
Yeah.
immediate, because it's just if you have illusions that you're gonna like go home and write after a 16, 18 hour shoot day, you're fucking crazy. I mean, maybe or not, or you're a better man than me. Like, I
Or
mean,
you need a
but
little
it's
something called cocaine.
yeah. You need some,
Like,
yeah, a little extra help. But like, no, it's like you're running on like 4 hours of sleep sometimes, and
right,
if that, and it's like you don't have the energy or just the headspace. Even if you have an
right,
hour to do it, that's not like it's also
right.
not good for you if you're just like actually burning the candle at both ends 24/7. Like
Oh my God.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna do a shittier job on set. Uh, so no, I think it was just like kind of a mental like this is not forever, but I can't be trying to do everything at once.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you just kind of have to accept that early on. And because frankly, there are periods between movies where it's a little quieter, where one movie's finishing
Right.
and another's starting. You've got that kind of lull in there where, sure, you want to try and maximize that time and get some writing done or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, for me, like it was about you kind of just have to accept it and not have illusions that you're gonna, you know, I'm going to be making a feature while like working on these big productions because that's insane. You're not.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so, yeah, I think that was just something you kind of had to accept really early on. And at a certain point, it becomes kind of a boiling point and that itch becomes too great.
Hmm.
And it did for me. And then you have to be strategic because then you're like, okay, how am I going to how and when am I going to do a project?
Right.
Um, or am I just going to like quit my job and commit to this full time? And like, those thoughts are always running through your head, but like, you kind of have to be strategic in planning it out because, um, you know, you kind of can't do this forever, or you can, or you're just like, I
Right.
love it.
Or you
And
just,
I'm
yeah.
all, and people do that and good for them. It's like, I'm happy in
Sure.
this
I mean, look at
world,
Clint Eastwood's team. I mean, he's had producers working with him for 40 years, and
yeah.
they love it, right? They
And they
love
love
working
it.
with him, and
That's all
yeah,
they
and
want. Yeah,
that becomes their path, right?
right, right. But it was like I just was never going to be that person. Like I came into that world wanting to do a job I wasn't being asked to do, and that was never going to change. So it was all about mental balance because it was like
Yeah.
I truthfully am going to do my damn best job for you guys, which means I can't be thinking about the other job right now.
Right.
Um, And that's kind of what I did. And then, after a number of years, like, I'm not the assistant anymore. Like, you get a little more flexibility, and the idea of trying to kind of dip a toe in both worlds becomes a little more manageable.
Hmm.
But I had to wait that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah, and so now that kind of leads us to these later few years of still working on that level with that team of
Yeah,
people, but starting to think about your own work. And I think it was you sent me these two shorts, which I watched and I loved. I thought they were excellent, well executed, interesting genre films that you brought in a unique and original way into a character's POV. So I want to talk about those, but
sure.
maybe like gearing up for those two productions, what was sort of that, maybe tapering off or feathering off the intensity of this workload, getting some time to write and thinking about, okay, is it going to be a feature? Is it going to be short films? Like, you're starting to think about your career now, right? As a
Mm-hmm.
writer, director, producer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure, if you're like me, I'm sure you're like me, and more of our friends, you're thinking about, okay, what the big projects I want to get to, what is that strategic, tactical, and also just satisfying path to hopefully building up and gearing up for those bigger projects is. So maybe just talk about what your headspace was with that, wanting to get into producing your own stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's you're hitting on a very key moment for me. But what's interesting is a lot less intellectual than you're describing it for me. Like it was way
Okay.
more guttural. Like it was like it came after we finished shooting Indiana Jones, which
Okay.
has got to be the hardest shoot I've ever done, and frankly, probably will ever do.
Yeah, I'm sure.
For obvious reasons, and then
Yeah.
less obvious reasons, like just making a movie with for Indiana Jones, say no more. But on top of that,
Right.
making a movie with an 80-year-old star at the height of COVID, when people don't even really know how to make a movie during COVID, where travel restrictions, quarantines all over the place, shooting across multiple countries,
Oh
um,
God. Yeah.
and
Wow.
then and then infection tracing. So we'd be tested every day. So if one crew member goes down, it's like, were you the person closest to them? Which meant constant rejiggering of the schedule. So,
Mm.
I mean, I ended up being abroad for just shy of 1 year,
Wow.
just for prep and production, not
Wow.
including writing or post. So
Hmm.
that was such a physically demanding, like even just the mental capacity of like, what country are we shooting in next week, and what travel restriction paperwork have we not fulfilled yet, and like
Oh
it,
yeah.
and like we started wearing both masks and visors on that set. It was just
Yeah, I remember that time.
truly so unbelievable. It's just unfathomable. Like
Yeah,
it's
the
hard
amount
to
of
imagine.
adversity, right? Like it's making like under perfect conditions, it's hard enough making a film, but you add
Yes.
all of these extra obstacles and the amount, yeah, I can only imagine the amount of mental
No,
legwork
Harrison
you
got
have
hurt
to
at
do.
one point and had to hiatus for like 2 weeks. And it's like, okay, great. So we have all these other actors, all these crew members. How do you make an Indiana Jones movie without Indiana Jones? Even for like a little bit of time, like without
Mm.
shutting it all down. So it
Hmm.
was truly so hard. But the reason I bring this up is because it was when we finished shooting that movie. I had been out of the country for like a year. I get back to the States. We've just wrapped. And the feeling I have is I am going to actually die if I don't make my own movie. Like, like, don't get me wrong. Indy and Star Wars were like these childhood, dreams. And
Yeah.
so this was a total dream project that I'm incredibly grateful to be a part of. But the other side of me that, as we just talked about, I was like consciously putting on hold is now exploding, and I'm going to explode and die if I don't make
Yeah.
something. So
Right.
basically, we get back to the States, and I don't even really know if I have the headspace to write. I just know I have to make something. So I start looking through old writing. And as with any artist or creative person, I think we strive to get better. So you look back on your work from years ago and you feel like you've improved. So I'm looking
Hmm.
back on writing and I'm just hating it all. I'm just like, terrible shit, whatever. And then I get to the feature that I wrote during the period before I started working for Jim.
Mm.
And I start reading that, the one that I would have made. And I'm still reading it going, thank God I didn't make this. I'm like flipping through pages and I'm going, shit, terrible, awful, shit, garbage. But then I get to this sequence about this guy in a house, not sure if the air is safe to breathe. And then this woman in a red dress shows up. And then the scene keeps going and she shows up a second time. And I was like, this is kind of interesting. Then I get past that sequence and I go back to shit, terrible, awful, whatever. But I was like, there's something interesting here. And so basically that became Red Velvet.
Mm.
Um, I was like, there's an interesting concept in this small section of this larger thing. So I basically was like, how could this be its own short? And I had another short a couple years prior that not fell apart, but just it never happened. And it was about a man and a woman in a dingy motel. And that project
Mm.
never got made. But we were scouting and doing all this stuff. And so I was like, there was a part of me that still really wanted to do something in that world and now had the sequence that was kind of compelling. And I was like, okay, maybe I can repurpose this into its own short story. And so I did. I put it in a motel and all this stuff. Um, but basically, Red Velvet, the writing came about very quickly because I got back to the States. I'm like, I need to make something. I find this one thing that's kind of interesting, and I just like take it apart and put it back together. Um,
Yeah.
and I wrote it, I think, in like April, and we shot in June. Like it was very
Cool.
fast.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I bet like coming back and being on multiple projects that were so high octane and just around that creative energy, logistical energy, you were so charged up. There was nothing that was going to stop you, right?
That's a
Like it
great
was.
point. Yeah, I actually I don't think about it that often, but you're right. It was very much like after what I just went through, I
Yeah,
was
and it's
so
not
afraid of
physical. It's not
nothing.
physical energy I'm talking about. It's like creative energy. Like if I don't
Yeah,
put this somewhere, like you said to your words, I'm going to explode. You
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. It was just like I'm doing it no matter what. It's like nothing.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of nothing right now. So
Yeah. Yeah.
let's make it. And so it came together really quickly.
Very cool. And so this was Red Velvet. You wrote
Yeah.
it, prep through May, shoot in June, and
hmm
then was post like a couple months, few months, and you were sending it
Yeah,
off.
it was a few months. I was like, if we shot in June, I think we were done around October with post.
Okay, gotcha.
Um, and that was a really interesting. I mean, then we can talk about faces, but Red Velvet was such an interesting pivot for me because I had never done a horror movie.
Okay,
Um,
gotcha.
and even though earlier I talked about like wanting to do all these genres, ironically, horror was always the one thing I was not interested in and did not
Mm,
want to do. And I
mm,
think that's because unlike a lot of the contemporaries I'm now friends with who I've met on at these festivals, I was not the kid who grew up watching those movies.
mm,
So I have absolutely no nostalgia for it. And I genuinely didn't watch horror movies until my early 20s. Honestly, probably started watching horror movies like seriously. And don't get me wrong, the big ones, Alien, The Exorcist, like Shining, I had seen those. But by
yeah,
and
yeah.
large, the genre, I
Right.
had really not given a chance until after film school.
Okay,
Um,
gotcha,
and that's
gotcha.
because I was too afraid. Like, I didn't want to watch them,
Mm.
I was scared. Um,
I've kind of got a similar thing in that way going on.
really?
Yeah,
Yeah, I was afraid of it. And also, I think in film school, I don't know if you ever heard this, but like, I heard from a couple of teachers that like, oh, horror is a really good avenue because you can do it cheaply
yeah,
and
yeah.
like you can make money back. So like, you
Right.
should do horror. And I
Yeah.
just remember hearing that and super resenting that because I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I again,
yeah.
as the person in film school that was just like, I have this really hard vision I want to pull off. I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way to do it. Don't tell me I can't. I resented it even more to be told what to make.
Mm,
Not just what
hmm.
not just what not to make, but being told what to make. I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
screw you. Um,
Super restrictive thinking.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I was like, I don't. Part of me was like, I don't want to do horror on principle, and then part of me was like, I'm too afraid of it and uninterested. So I really never saw myself getting to the point where I am now. Where,
Yeah, but it sounds like
you
with
know,
Red Velvet, it's like it wasn't even that, rereading through that script, that feature script, finding that scene, it wasn't even that it was a specific genre. You were interested in the dynamic of this sort of conceit
yes,
for this sequence you had set up and
yes,
wanted to explore that. And
yes,
and that's what
exactly.
too, I mean, with Faces as well, but like sticking with Red Velvet, it felt more like a Hitchcockian, like the supernatural element kind of came in at
hmm
the end, and obviously you set up like this larger world
Question,
conceit
yeah,
of, yeah, like something, the nuclear plants affecting the air. um but really, and I think that's what made both shorts really successful, is you're taking a high concept and some of these supernatural elements, but the design of the visual storytelling is very just, pure Hitchcock,
yeah,
thriller suspense,
yeah,
making us kind of lean in as these events start to escalate and
yeah.
culminate in some sort of
For
reversal at the
sure,
end.
Red
But
Velvet definitely was like less about you have to be afraid the whole time and more about just making you like on edge and like
yeah, yeah,
constantly like on unnerved and like the
yeah,
like you said, the Hitchcockian, is the bomb going to go off? The question of, you know, something's going to happen at any second, and I don't
Right.
know when.
Right.
And that,
And
you're
even
right. That
even
was,
like
yeah,
Kubrick's take on horror in The Shining is very much that way too. You know, it's not
yes,
so much of like the jump scare, the
no,
grotesque, you know, lady in the tub. That was like his one moment where it was like, oh, this is a horror film. No, it's this
yeah,
like creeping, unsettling
you're just uncomfortable.
unpredictability. Things
Yeah,
are off. Yeah, you're uncomfortable. So
yeah.
yeah, it was very cool. And then, you know, taking that, were you into festivals by the time you were had this idea for Faces? Like, when did that sort of, you know, I'm kicking off, I've still got this creative flow going, I want to do
Yeah.
this second film.
Well, yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, because that, for me, that was a very conscious thing, making the second film, because so much time had passed with the big movies where I wasn't making my own work, like we've talked about, that I knew the moment I finished Red Velvet, it would be the easiest thing in the world to stop and go back to the big movies, because it was like, oh, I scratched the itch. But I knew, like, it's just going to be so long before I can make another movie if I don't do
Mm,
it right now. Because it is that
mm,
period between movies is so small. So,
yeah.
um, so I finished Red Velvet, and was it in festivals? No, no, it wasn't in festivals yet. Um, but I wrote and we shot Faces before Red Velvet screened anywhere.
Oh, okay.
So, uh, so basically, what is the timeline? We shot in June. This is of 2022. Um, the movie's done with post in, say, October. I
Okay.
basically start writing Faces that month. Like the
Hmm.
month we were like, I think I started writing probably before the film was done, as I'm waiting for like final visual effects and sound or whatever. I just start writing.
Yeah.
Um, and I write Faces. And the funny thing was, even though we've talked about how Red Velvet's horror, but it's also kind of just like horror adjacent and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
I really felt kind of like New Kid on the Block, because I really, especially at these festivals, because like everyone's so passionate, and they're all like,
Yeah.
first of all, I could talk a lot about the community and how welcoming it is, and they're kind of some of the most amazing people. But truly, these people are the, like, they're arguing, Halloween 17 versus Jason in Space versus like
Yeah.
stuff, and
Yeah.
like well beyond my horror movie knowledge, and
Yeah.
just like deep cut stuff. And so I really felt like an outsider. Um, and then I went to these festivals with Red Velvet. Well, actually, a slightly different rationale. When Red Velvet finished, before we screened it everywhere, we liked it and we thought it was good. And
Mm-hmm.
so that just gave me a little confidence to do it again. But
Mm, mm,
genuinely, Red Velvet, in terms of horror, it felt like a toe dip in the sandbox. Like, I
mm.
felt like I was not trying to make this intense horror movie, but like just playing in this space for the first time and trying to, test the waters, see how comfortable I was. And making that movie, I really felt like I learned something about myself as an artist, because I felt like I was doing some of my best directing on that set. Um, and it wasn't planned. It just felt right and
Natural.
instinctual.
Just
Like
felt natural. Yeah.
it felt like in every genre, I think filmmakers have a different set of tools,
Sure.
because every genre has different tropes, different expectations, and therefore different ways to subvert those expectations. And horror, just like every other genre, has its own toolbox. And it was a toolbox I'd never played with. And on the set of Red Velvet, it felt like I naturally knew what to do with these tools,
Mm, mm.
which was incredibly fulfilling. I was just like, wow, like I'm having so much, arguably more fun than even on like Goldilocks or something. Like I just was
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
dialed in. And not to say like,
Very
oh,
cool.
it's amazing, clearly my best work, but just I felt so
Yeah, you
comfortable.
were. Yeah, and I know the feeling. Like, I did this
Yeah.
short before Neon Bleed, right before COVID happened, the locked room, and
Uh huh.
regardless of, I don't even think I submitted it to festivals. I just wanted to make something, and I think I put it
Yep.
on IGTV. I was like,
Yeah.
I had this script idea come. I wanted to just shoot it. I starred in it as well. Like, it felt like a purely artistic experience where the
Yes.
contact between me and the story was like point blank,
Yes.
as an artist
Yeah.
to the story. And you felt like any decision you made, and this isn't, like you were saying, like my best work, and it didn't what was in my head didn't translate. It was like, I didn't care. I was just going to
Yeah.
make that decision and make,
Yes.
like, I knew how to just feel my way through this story. So yeah,
Exactly.
I resonate with that 100%.
So that was a huge kind of identity learning thing for me, was when that movie ended, it was like I had so much fun in this, playing in this sandbox, that initially I was kind of a little reticent to enter. Um, and so I knew two things. I knew, one, I would be remiss if I didn't try to make another movie, because this window is going to close fast. Like, we were finishing indie, and we were going to go right into the Bob Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown.
Mm,
So I was
mm,
like, my window is a small one. Um, so and also, I think any filmmaker will know, you're going to know exactly what I mean. One of the hardest parts about making a movie is like getting it going, and like the momentum, and just
yeah.
like finding your people. And one thing I found, and I'm curious if you've experienced this, but especially like going so many years post film school without making something, it's a lot of new people. Like, you're like,
Mm,
not all your crew is available, but from back in the day, like some of
right,
them are
right.
still in the game, some of them have
Yeah,
left the industry, others are too
yeah,
big to work with you, and everything in between. So
right.
half the
Yeah,
battle making a movie is just finding your team and getting the momentum going. So
yeah.
um like the producers on Red Velvet, obviously Jared Seltzer, who you know, and Liz Holland, like they were so valuable, because they pretty much assembled the crew. Like,
Mm,
with a couple exceptions of people like I'd worked with for years, like Brent Mason and stuff,
yeah.
production design, like uh, I was like, guys, we got to make this movie, and I've been out of the game for a minute, so like, help
Yeah,
me. How do we do this? And they assembled
yeah.
this crew, and then we were just kind of like a well-oiled machine on Red Velvet. And so coming off that movie, knowing how hard it is to make a movie, knowing I've got this great crew of people that I loved working with, and they're available now, and
Mm,
knowing my window's about to close, I was like, I got to do it again. We got to run it back. So I wrote Faces while finishing Red Velvet. I wrote Faces in October. We shot Faces the following February. And then we premiered Red Velvet for the first time 2 months later in April.
wow,
And then
wow.
I got married in May. So so it was an
Lot
insane,
happening.
a lot happening.
Yeah,
Because like we
but
were
all
planning a
fulfilling
wedding.
stuff. Like,
It's
that
fulfilling, but
sounds like a
yeah,
blissful flow state.
it was.
All
It
the
was
types of things you
hilarious.
want to be doing. Yeah,
It was. It's just next to impossible. But it was
right.
hilarious planning a wedding while like being like, babe, I'm gonna shoot another movie before,
Yeah, yeah,
because it was like the deal we made was like, the moment we wrap, we can't start post till the wedding's done. Like, it was like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
um,
Oh
but
man.
so no, going into Faces, it was all about like, do it before the window closes, run it back. Like, I want all the crew, same people, and now that I'm really comfortable in this genre that I hadn't touched before, I want to take a much bigger swing.
Mm,
And story wise, do something that scares me more than the last movie. And so that was my headspace, going from one project into the next.
cool, cool. Yeah, I think it was fascinating too. I think there's some thread, like not to say this sort of reveals your preoccupations as a writer storyteller, or your style in any way, but
Go for it.
I
Yeah.
yeah, no, I find it interesting. It's like, really, the both films are about identity, right? They use sort of this, supernatural, yeah, maybe horror adjacent, but definite supernatural thriller, suspense thriller, uh convention or genre feel,
Yeah.
and they explore identity at the end of the day, right? And
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
the way you captured it, I mean, especially the visual language, and I'd be curious to know, having worked with Andy,
Yeah. Yeah.
the
We have to
phenomenal
talk about
Andrew
Andy. Yeah.
Yeah, Andrew Franzak. I'd be curious to know like how involved he was in helping you discover that visual style, because it was so specific, especially faces. I think was like an even another level. Some of those long lens tracking shots at the party,
Yeah.
or just the intimacy of not being afraid to stay on a long lens profile shot and
Hmm.
see that subtle emotion of this demon possessing this body. And it was bold. It was bold, and it was color. I mean, especially faces with the color, the production design, the choices you guys made.
Yeah.
Did you shoot 16 millimeter film, or were those
No,
like film
no.
grain filters you were putting? Okay.
It was all post emulation, and
Wow.
I mean we took creative steps in production to
Right. You knew you were going in that direction.
we knew
Yeah.
we knew where we were headed. So
Yeah.
we did all kinds of tests before shooting, frankly, at
Okay.
ways to degrade the image. And
Okay.
then we just went further in post. But
Yeah, that's very
obviously, I'm
cool.
honored that you would ask that question. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
so maybe
Andy.
talk
Yeah,
about the not just Andy, but also production design and
yeah.
sound, all of that. Like what was it like kind of making that step from Red Velvet to
Well,
Faces? And
it was interesting because it was like I've gone like the opposite direction of what I was doing in film school. Like Goldilocks was super clean, super sharp, super high res, kind of clinically, and it worked for the movie, but like this clinical, sterile sci-fi
yeah,
environment with
right.
sharp edges and white walls and just, and it worked for the movie. But
Mhm.
my aesthetic has really just, just gone in the opposite direction. Like now I'm maybe to a fault. Like now I don't want to shoot on the latest camera. I don't want to
Yeah,
shoot like super super
super
high res.
clean. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
like I really want it to feel messy and kind of pastiche.
Hmm.
And like everyone discovers their aesthetic the more they work, and I've just kind of fallen into that and finding I feel really comfortable in that space. And Red Velvet was the first time we kind of went in that direction, and the film I think successfully has such an intense vibe that
Yeah,
excuse me, that it was like not unlike the story. The look of it, I was like, I just want to go further in this direction.
mm,
So no, I mean
cool.
in terms of like both cinematography, production design, the entire world, I just wanted it to feel um, kind of like classic '80s horror.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, definitely
and
translated for sure.
yeah, I wanted it to feel throwbacky. And even though the film's modern day, even though there are literally smartphones in the
Right.
film, I wanted it to have this sense of being kind of like out of time. Like
Yeah.
if it weren't for that iPhone, you could kind of conceivably be any year.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and that was a really intentional thing with the look and feel of the movie. Um, and then on top of that, it was interesting because story wise, I knew if we were having it feel like these classic '80s horror, you were going to set up a heavy expectation, and the moment Brad shows up outside the donut shop and is playing this kind of jockey character trope that we all know,
Hmm.
I thought the audience is gonna watch this scene and go, I know what this movie is. And
Yeah.
we are
Yeah.
gonna subvert the hell out of that. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like I always tell people I feel like in Faces, the opening scene, you're like, I get it. We're about to watch like Halloween. And by the end
right.
of the movie, it's a very different experience.
Right.
Um, and so that was kind
Right.
of our goal too, was like wanting it to look and feel a certain way to emphasize the impact of where it's going because
Right.
I think going to be more unpredictable the more it feels familiar, you know?
Yeah, and I think, that's the pathway to those, going back to the beginning of this conversation, those
Yeah.
intangibles, right?
Yes.
Is looking great storytellers look for ways to push the forms, and not even just in ways people traditionally think of pushing the form, like technologically, like James Cameron, but those whatever that magic is between the cut,
Yeah.
on the image, making these decisions from a ultimately storytelling perspective. The story is king. Like how can I, giving what an audience knows when they come in, and this is why Hitchcock is sort of a god in this way, is I'm
Hmm.
going to be one step ahead of them, and I'm always going to subvert what they think
Yeah.
what they think I'm going to give them, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's that's, yeah, I commend you, and I
Thank you.
I'm your biggest supporter in that way. I want to see you keep going and build these things up,
I
because those
appreciate
are,
it. Thanks, man.
of course, yeah. I mean, this is, and I think nowadays too, it's like we need some fresh original storytelling, even in a big way, in the bigger studio sense. It's like we need
Yeah.
young storytellers to keep pushing. So yeah,
Yeah.
incredible
Yeah.
job.
Thank you.
Incredible job.
And just to pivot for a second and talk about Andy.
Yeah.
Andy's it's I just think a fun subject because we both work with him, and
Yeah.
maybe for him. I don't know, but
Yeah,
uh,
sometimes, right? That's a good
but
point.
but
Sometimes.
but like I'm sure our collaborations with him are both very similar and very different. And it's like you look at Neon Bleed, and you look at Red Velvet, and you look at Faces, and like these
Mm.
movies I think all look fucking great and don't look anything alike,
Yeah, yeah,
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
awesome. And part of that is like my aesthetic and your aesthetic, but part of that is just Andy's like versatility. Like the fact that like
Yes.
I wouldn't watch those movies and go, that's the same guy is like, I don't know.
Great.
It's just like I don't know, kind of a chameleon. It's like that's who you want to work with, you know?
Totally. I think Andy, what makes him successful now, and what is going to make him uber successful as he continues his career and his creative path, is he's an incredible listener. Like those first meetings, I mean, I laid out every shot in my head for the entirety of Neon Bleed in a series of meetings with Andy. And he said very little words in those meetings, right? He asked the important questions he needed to know if he needed clarification, but he did an incredible job. I mean, a supernatural job of just listening for hours,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's a superpower unto itself. But then the other side of Andy is he has such a strong creative opinion himself,
Yeah.
and a stance, and he's a force all his own, especially when it gets into production and he's leading his little army of camera and
Hmm.
lighting. But he has a strong gut sense of what he thinks is going to work as well, and so that's like that. Those are both superpowers, right? Because I think sometimes you get one or the other, or you get someone who's just not as confident as a listener, or someone who has their own voice,
Yeah.
really.
No, it's
And
often like the people who talk the most that you
right,
don't want to be listening to, you know?
right,
And
right, yeah,
it's when people like Andy who they listen so well that it means so much more when they have something to say because
right,
they've thought it
right,
through. And
yeah.
it's, and
Well
they're
said.
choosing their words wisely.
Yeah.
And Andy is also just a storyteller,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
he's not just like, ooh, what's a cool fancy lens everyone's using. Like he gives a shit about what's right for the story. And some of the best notes I got on the script were from Andy.
Mhm.
Like
Mm,
tangible changes I made were the notes I got from him
sure.
before we like locked the pages. And so,
Yeah. That's awesome.
he cares about more than just does it look pretty.
Right, right, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean he's definitely an author unto himself, and that's something, like, as I work on projects, I try to, you know, bring more people like this into the fold, whether they're actors or cinematographers, composers. It's, do they have their own authorship over,
Yes.
do they own their part of it, right?
Yeah.
Not just
Yeah.
looking for a job or how to elevate what they do, divorced from the story. Is this going to work for the story? But really bringing a strong authorship and a strong value and investing themselves in that part of it. And yeah,
Exactly.
Andy's awesome. I
Exactly.
can't say enough
I
great
know. We
things
love you,
about him.
Andy.
Yes,
If
yes. We'll
you've
cut
made
a
it
whole
this
clip.
far, yeah, yeah,
We'll cut
yeah.
a whole clip, the magic of Andrew Franzak, and post that to IG.
Perfect, perfect. The Andy shout out section.
But yeah, listen, Blake. I mean, I have so many questions that we could go on for another hour. I do want to wrap this up. I would love to have you back and get into more
Sure. Yeah.
nitty gritty
Anytime.
as things evolve and the future becomes the present. But I want to wrap this up just by asking, like, what's next? Like, now that you have these two short films that have been successful at the festivals, and congrats on, I think it was Fantasia, right? One of the bigger
Fantasia.
ones. Yeah,
Fantasia
that's
was
awesome.
our world premiere for Faces, and then we won
So
the
cool.
audience award there as well. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you, man.
And so
Yeah,
coming off
that
of
was a
that,
dream. That was a dream for
oh,
sure.
I'm sure, right? Like one of
Yeah.
the bigger festivals, and that's Montreal, right? It's in
Yeah.
Montreal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's okay. So you have this sort of like, it's creatively satisfying. It's satisfying in terms of an audience. You get that validation at a big festival and win an audience award. Where are you right now coming out of these two projects? I know you have, I'm sure, a complete unknown. You're going to be doing press for that and going on that whole journey in a month or
Sure.
so.
Yeah.
But where are you with your own stuff? What are you hungry for next, I guess?
Well, John, I'm gonna retire.
Dude, I feel like you've lived multiple lifetimes already in a film career. I would not. That's not the least understandable thing.
No, as tempting as that is,
Yeah.
yeah, I have nothing left to give. No, no, it's a good question. I mean, the short answer is I do, you've already made a very successful, wonderful feature yourself with Neon Bleed. That's something that it's a bridge I just haven't crossed yet. And I definitely feel like I'm at the point where I need to.
Mm,
So the succinct answer is that, my first feature is what's next. Um,
yeah.
More specifically, I've made as any filmmaker's done shorts gets, and I'm sure you did as well. Anytime you make a short, everyone's like, "Oh, you're going to turn this into a feature?" Like every single
Yeah.
time,
Yeah. Yeah.
and my answer has always been no. And that's probably a problem. I think that everyone knows about the proof of concept to feature route and the value in it, but I've always struggled with that. Like I've written features like that wasn't the only feature I wrote. I've written multiple, and I get an idea for a feature and I'll write it, or I'll get an idea from a short for a short and I'll make it. And
Right.
for whatever reason, they've always been completely discrete in my mind
Yeah.
as like this project is this thing. Even Red Velvet, I got that question, and I was like, I mean, like, yeah, I could go back to that script, but like, it just is its own thing now. So anyway, Faces was the first short I made that was not, again, just like all my others, not a proof of concept, but it's the first time I made a short where when it was done, I knew immediately that there was more story to explore in this world,
Mm,
um, and more that that I wanted to know about in this story.
cool.
And so yeah, I'm actively developing Faces to be my first feature right now.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, I cannot wait to hear how that progresses. And like I said, I think it's so important for you to be doing what you're doing, especially having toes, feet. I don't know what part of your body is in the bigger sort of Hollywood
yeah,
thing, Hollywood machine, but it's so important for people our age, filmmakers, not even our age, but just filmmakers doing what we do to keep
yeah.
evolving it, right? I mean, this is the future of the industry. If there's any sort of artistic, fresh perspectives that are left in this industry, it's like it's our generation and that passion that comes from the independent space that I think always pushes things forward from a story perspective. So congratulations on your two films, and
Thank
and
you.
Did you win an Oscar technically? Do you have an
Ah,
Oscar?
no, I do not
No,
have an
okay.
Oscar.
I was
No,
gonna say
no,
congrats on. I was like, I need clarity on this. Did Blake actually win an Oscar or not?
absolutely not.
But
No,
obviously,
that because that
congratulations on.
then that'd be the only thing I talk about. Yeah,
Right, right. Yeah, you would have started with that.
yeah, exactly.
I'm retiring. I've won my Oscar. That's it.
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
exactly.
no, but congratulations on all your work
Thank you, man.
with Mr. James Mangold, because it's, obviously a director on that level is an auteur in a sense, but they operate because of the work of everyone around them too. So I know you have your DNA in those films as well.
Kind of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, of course. And yeah, like I said, excited to see what comes next for you. This has been a lot of fun. Appreciate
It's
you
been
doing
great.
this.
Thank you so much for having me on, man. It's so fun to catch up and just like,
Yeah.
there's so much to talk about, that we've
Well,
both
and
been through.
for me, this has become like a diary. I want to
Yeah.
capture, people that I know from film school that I've met along the way, that I value what they do and care about what they do, and I want to make sure that we record this stuff to
Yeah.
look back on, later on. So that's kind of the impetus for it. But thanks again for
Thank you.
doing it. Yeah, I
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
having me. It's been a pleasure, man.